Terror attack in the heart of New York City. One of the big stories we're following as we await the White House briefing. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. The suspect, originally from Bangladesh, set off a pipe bomb strapped to his body in an underground passageway near Times Square, sparking chaos at the height of rush hour and one of the busiest transit hubs in the world. The 27-year-old man is now in custody amid a fast-moving investigation. Reaction now from Governor Andrew Cuomo.
This is New York, and we all pitch together, and we are a savvy people, and we keep our eyes open, and that's what See Something, Say Something is all about. And we have the best law enforcement on the globe.
Rick Leventhal is live in New York City. Rick, what is the latest?
Dana, I have some late-breaking information from law enforcement sources who are working this investigation who say the suspect had no known co-conspirators, that he made the device at work where he was employed at an electric company, and that he has extensive overseas travel since arriving here in the U.S. in February 2011. His name, Akayed Ullah. He's 27, lived in Brooklyn, from Bangladesh in the U.S., as I mentioned, for 6.5 years now, a lawful permanent resident, I'm told, with a license at one point to drive a livery cab, not a yellow cab, but a livery cab in New York. It's not clear if Ullah was inspired by ISIS. Some are reporting that he told investigators that this morning's attack was a revenge for attacks overseas, possibly U.S. action in Gaza, but that is so far unconfirmed by my sources. But if his goal was to inflict damage and death, he failed miserably. Authorities say Ullah had a low-tech pipe bomb strapped to his body with Velcro and zip ties, and when it detonated in that underground passageway between the Port Authority and Times Square, the bomber was the only one seriously injured, with lacerations and burns to his hands and abdomen. 3 other people were hurt, but they were complaining of headaches and ringing ears, Dana, and they self-transported to local hospitals. So that looks like they're going to be okay. This guy obviously being held under guard until he's able to go to court.
Rick, 2 questions. They caught the guy very quickly, and do you have any other information about where he might have traveled overseas in the last couple of years?
Don't have that information, just that he traveled extensively overseas. The Port Authority police, who are in charge of the Port Authority and other locations around the city, including the World Trade location, they were the first on scene. Port Authority police officers quickly collared this guy, but obviously it was all hands on deck, and the NYPD raced to this location along with the MTA, state police, and the FBI. Now the investigators are searching the suspect's home, his family's home, and obviously scouring his social media and any devices for clues to his inspiration and possible accomplices. And the mayor is now encouraging New Yorkers to carry on.
This is the most resilient place on earth. We've proven it time and time again. We proved it just over a month ago. We proved it on 9/11. We're going to prove it again today. The terrorists will not win. We're going to keep being New Yorkers. Let's get back to work.
The governor has now announced enhanced security measures at key locations across the state, including bridges and tunnels and mass transit areas. But obviously, Dana, New York City remains a prime target for terrorists.
Indeed. All right, Rick Leventhal, thank you so much. Investigators now searching for evidence linked to the bombing. This as Fox News has obtained surveillance video showing the suspect detonating the bomb. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo points out that the device used was very low tech.
There was an explosion. The police commissioner will go over the details. It was an effectively low-tech device. There were several injuries, we hope minor.
Joining me now is Joey Jones, a retired bomb technician with the U.S. Marine Corps. I'm so glad you could join us today. Joey, what do you think happened with this particular bomb?
Good afternoon. Looking at this, there's kind of 2 scenarios that could have played out. One, there was a problem in the chemistry of the main charge. In other words, in mixing chemicals to make an explosive, he made a mistake and the bomb did what we call low-ordered, which means in order to set off high explosives, you cause a small explosion, which then sets off the higher explosive. A more volatile explosive sets it off. What it looks like looking at the video is either the difference between the initiator, the blasting cap, if you will, probably something improvised, even like a shotgun shell, that went off, but the main charge did not, which is called a low order, And there's also evidence of that, considering the fact you can see the picture of his body. He doesn't really have a lot of lacerations or penetration there. And then the other idea here is that he used a more low explosive, like black powder, like the whole bomb was made of, say, shotgun shell type material. And when you set that off, if there's any weakness in the container, it'll essentially just vent. In other words, instead of blowing up, it'll kind of burn out. And that's the video could show either of those scenarios. Listening to the little tidbits of information like low tech and probably worked alone, and the fact this person might have an electronic background but not a chemistry background,
right.
I tend to lean more towards it's using a more low explosive, something more commonly available, but isn't as volatile and doesn't set off a big explosion. So all sorts of signs of novice and amateurism, as well as probably working alone.
But if it had been the first scenario, the one that you're talking about, and it had worked, would the damage possibly and the injuries and possible casualties been a lot worse?
Well, if it is a pipe bomb, I mean, they use these terms that are really, really general and don't speak very well to an imaginative what this was.
Okay.
If this was some sort of container bomb, then the number one thing is it's not set up like a suicide vest. When you set off an explosion, it goes in 360 degrees. When you make a suicide vest, you try to stop your body from absorbing half of that and pushing all of it out away from you.
Right.
You also add things that produce frag and shrapnel. We don't see any evidence of that right now with what we know, which means that had this gone off completely, his body, being more soft material than most things around him, would have absorbed at least half of this, to include the frag and shrapnel if there were any there. So there's a lot of signs of amateurism. It doesn't seem like a suicide vest purposefully made to explode out and cause harm.
Right.
Seems like someone who might very well have been upset and tried to do something he didn't quite know how to do.
Rukmini Callimachi, she's the New York Times reporter who covers ISIS, and she tweeted that after every attack where the casualties are few, I see misinformed people labeling it as a failed terror attack and theorizing ISIS won't claim it because it was botched. Let's be clear, this man walked into Times Square wearing a bomb. That is not a fail in ISIS's eyes. And is that something we need to get our heads around, that this is a generational war, and while we have not had these types of attacks in New York City, that we could probably expect that there will be more to come, especially if somebody like this, without much training, can create a bomb that maybe it wasn't the best bomb he ever created, but we have to be on a war footing.
Well, you know, the idea of lone wolf terrorism is someone that's personally inspired by what they see, not contact made, to go do something bad. They join this cause. We're fighting a war of ideas. We're fighting an enemy who thinks that what we stand for is not only offensive to them, but destructive to their way of life, and Sharia law and the things they would like to see implemented in their region and around the world. So whether or not ISIS sees this as a victory, I quipped earlier today, this guy was so bad at what he was doing, even ISIS wouldn't take credit, because I don't believe to date, right now they have. But the truth is, you know, this caused a lot of disruption in New York City today.
And a lot
probably
of cost.
caused some ripples in the market. Yes, and there's going to be a lot of money associated with what it took to cordon these places, stop the trains, and reset. I will tell you, though, if you go after New York City specifically, you might succeed in an attack, but they will absolutely succeed.
I was just
in
saying
finding
that
you and
before the show
neutralizing
started.
you.
There's only so much they'll take. All right, Johnny Joey Jones, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. The Alabama Senate election campaign now in its final hours, with voters heading to the polls tomorrow. Democrat Doug Jones is holding multiple events around the state, while Republican Roy Moore has a rally scheduled tonight. Jonathan Seri is covering the race for us. Jonathan.
Hi, Dana. He's billing it as a Drain the Swamp rally. It's scheduled to take place in this barn that you see behind me here in southeast Alabama. Roy Moore will be joined on the stage by former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who rallied with Moore at another barn in the town of Fairhope back on Tuesday. And the campaign is sending out a robocall recorded by President Trump. Listen.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore. His vote is our Republican Senate, and it's needed. We need Roy to help us with the Republican Senate. We will win, and we will make America great again.
But a new Fox News poll shows Democrat Doug Jones polling 10 points ahead of Moore in a state that normally favors Republicans. Here's a sample of what's on the minds of Alabama voters.
I'm voting for Jones.
And I'll be voting for Judge Moore.
Truth be told, I haven't really decided yet. My
Granddad's gonna write in about something because he's a Republican, but he don't like Roy Moore. But I'm still kind of tossed up.
Luther Strange was my choice, but I want to keep a Republican in the Senate.
And then as for the other campaign, a Doug Jones campaign officials confirms that former President Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden have also recorded robocalls, these robocalls on behalf of their candidate, Doug Jones. So it's entirely possible that if you're a voter in Alabama, you will hear dueling robocalls from the current and former President, Dana.
That is if they answer their phone at all. Jonathan, thanks so much. More on the Alabama Senate election and how independent voters could impact the race between Doug Jones and Roy Moore. I'll talk to Chris Starwalt about that. Plus, a live look inside the White House briefing room where Sarah Sanders is expected very soon. We'll bring that to you as soon as she takes the podium.
On Sirius XM, your favorite shows on Channel 114. Plus, every story, every 15 minutes. Fox News headlines 24/7, Channel 115.
We're still awaiting the White House briefing by Sarah Sanders, and we'll bring it to you live as soon as it starts. As a Fox News poll shows Alabama Senate candidate Doug Jones with a big lead among independents one day before the special election. The poll shows Jones leading Republican Roy Moore 50 to 21% among unaffiliated voters. To help us break it all down, we bring in Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report, Chris Starwalt. Wondering what surprised you, if anything, in this poll and why those undecideds matter in a state that is so Republican in its affiliation.
Well, they ain't lying when they say that they're undecided, but they maybe just can't come to terms with it, with what they're going to do. There are no really undecided voters, especially when you get to the end like this. Those people either are leaning one way or another, or they're not going to vote. And really what we're looking at a great deal with this election is what kind of turnout model are we talking about? If this was a typical turnout year, if for a off, double special, triple flutter blast election in Alabama, you would say that the turnout would be very low because who would care? Because you know it's going to be the Republican because it was already settled in the primary, right? Well, this time, if it's different, it is going to be different. The question is how much different? How much more turnout is there going to be? What does the real pool of voters look like? And in the poll that we found, you take all this interest, you take all those independent voters, and it adds up to a pretty, I won't say astonishing, but a robust margin for the Democrat.
Let me play for you some sound from Senator Shelby, the sitting senator, the senior senator of Alabama, who made I think somewhat a bold and surprising move yesterday morning. Take a listen.
I couldn't vote for Roy Moore. I didn't vote for Roy Moore, but I wrote in a distinguished Republican name.
Do you believe these two Alabama women?
I think the women are believable. I have no reason not to believe them.
What did you make of that, Chris?
You know how they always talk about, oh, he's a real profile in courage? They mean it mockingly. That's actually what that looks like, because you do it when it comes when you do something hard. That means that you're doing it at risk to yourself and that a danger for your own future. And in the case of Shelby, this is a guy who doesn't want to have to tangle with Roy Moore forever. He doesn't want to have to deal with this guy. He doesn't want to have to deal with the about 30% of the voters in the state who are diehard Moorheads. They are all the way in for Roy Moore, and now they're going to hate Richard Shelby. He's going to have to deal with all that, and he did it anyway. And that's what courage looks like.
I wanted to ask you about turnout. So the New York Times Daily podcast reported that Jones needs, I don't know if you agree with this, but they reported Jones needs at least 25% turnout for African-American voters in order to have a chance at winning. And yet I read some reporting this weekend that there might be some difficulty in getting African-American voters to turn out to vote. And yet, again, today you have Obama and Biden recording robocalls. Will that help Doug Jones with that particular vote?
Well, yeah, it will. All of this attention will help Doug Jones will help turnout in general. This being sort of the major political event in America this month. This has taken the center stage as a proxy war between the wings of the Republican Party, Republicans and Democrats, and all of this stuff. So all that attention will add to something. But now we'll see whether or not it was a wise idea for Barack Obama to record a robocall down there. I think, given the intense unpopularity of Obama, even with independents willing to vote for Jones or to stay home and let the election happen without them. Inserting Obama into the race will not help Jones with those voters.
All right, well, we'll see. And we'll see you up here in New York for the special election coverage. All right. Chris Stirewalt, thanks so much. The White House briefing expected to get underway shortly, and we'll take you there as soon as it starts. Plus, the House and Senate inching closer to a deal on tax reform. How the Treasury Department says tax cuts will pay for themselves. Sarah Sanders has taken the podium. Here you go.
There were no life-threatening injuries. Undercover Port Authority Police Department officer Jack Collins apprehended the terrorists along with several other officers. These brave first responders and the others who rushed to the scene are heroes. On behalf of the President and a grateful nation, we would like to thank them and commend them for their bravery. This attack underscores the need for Congress to work with the President on immigration reforms that enhance our national security and public safety. We must protect our borders. We must ensure that individuals entering our country are not coming to do harm to our people, and we must move to a merit-based system of immigration. Additionally, this attack comes as our coalition continues to make great gains against ISIS. Still, there is more work to be done on the ground in the shrinking ISIS-controlled areas, and the President's plan to annihilate ISIS is moving forward. But we must also destroy the evil ideology that is behind ISIS and attacks like today's. This ideology has no borders, but it must be eradicated. The President has successfully rallied the world behind this cause, and we will not stop until it is accomplished. And with that, I'll take your questions. Francesca.
Thank you, Sarah. Wanted to ask you about the women who came forward today against the president. They first were on a television show, and then they were at a press conference, and they said that he should resign, and then also that there should be a congressional investigation. And I know that you said that this is already being litigated in the last election, but I wanted to get your specific reaction to this idea that there should be a congressional investigation into this.
Look, the president has addressed these accusations directly and denied all of these allegations, and this took place long before he was elected to be president, and the people of this country had a decisive election, supported President Trump, and we feel like these allegations have been answered through that process. Kristen.
Sarah, thank you. I want to follow up on that. But first, a little bit of breaking news we just learned about. The Pentagon apparently will now allow transgender people to enlist in the military beginning January 1st. Your reaction to that and any follow-up action you're going to take?
Yeah, as of right now, they're simply complying with a court order and preparing to implement a previous policy to remain in compliance. The Department of Justice is currently reviewing the legal options to ensure that the President's directive can be implemented. And for anything further and any specifics on both of those matters, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice.
Okay, one follow-up very quickly on Sarah. Just very quickly,
Sorry, Kristen.
Can I just ask you about Nikki Haley's comments saying that the President deserves to be heard?
I'll pick that up.
She's going to pick it up for you today.
Nikki Haley, as I'm sure you know, said when asked, does the election mean that's a settled issue, which you've been arguing from the podium here, she said, I know he was elected, but women should always feel comfortable coming forward. We should all be willing to listen to them, specifically referring to the accusers of the president. Does the president agree with her?
Look, that's the president said himself. He thinks it's a good thing that women are coming forward, but he also feels strongly that a mere allegation shouldn't determine the course. And in this case, the president has denied any of these allegations, as have eyewitnesses. And several reports have shown those eyewitnesses also back up the president's claim in this process. And again, the American people knew this and voted for the president, and we feel like we're ready to move forward in that process.
The women who accused him are coming forward now again?
The president has said that it's a good thing for women to be able to feel comfortable in coming forward, generally speaking. Jacqueline.
I just want to go off of that, Sarah. But the president told Howard Stern in 2005 that he had walked into a teen beauty pageant dressing room where he said that teen contestants had no clothes on because he could sort of get away with things like that. Is that not an admission of sexual harassment?
Look, the president's spoken about this directly. I don't have anything further to add on the process. Charlie, we're going to do one question today, guys, so move around.
Two ISIS attacks in New York City, or ISIS-inspired attacks in New York City, and just recently, is the president concerned that there is a growing threat against people inspired by ISIS who have been radicalized online?
I think that the president is certainly concerned that Congress, particularly Democrats, have failed to take action in some places where we feel we could have prevented this. Specifically, the president's policy has called for an end to chain migration, and if that had been in place, that would have prevented this individual from coming to the United States. So the president is aggressively going to continue to push forth responsible immigration reform, and ending chain migration would certainly be a part of that process. Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. The president reacted quite angrily over the weekend to a Washington Post reporter's tweet about crowd size that was quickly deleted. I'm wondering if you can help explain the discrepancy between the president's reaction to incidents like this, which he calls fake news, and talks quite a bit about, and his silence on actual disinformation campaigns like Russia ran during the 2016 election to deliberately spread false information. So both his silence on that, and does he recognize the difference between these two?
Difference, look, the president's simply calling out a very direct and false accusation lodged against him. There was nothing more than an individual trying to put their bias into their reporting, and something that frankly has gotten a little bit out of control. We've seen it time and time again over the last couple of weeks. A number of outlets have had to retract and change and rewrite and make editor's notes to a number of different stories. Some of them with major impacts, including moving markets. This is a big problem, and we think it's something that should be taken seriously. Jim?
Reporters' mistakes and disinformation campaign by a foreign government. Does he see a distinction there?
I haven't spoken with him about that, but certainly we would take any misinformation like that very seriously. But it's not something we're comparing the two on. Jim?
And I would just say, Sarah, that journalists make honest mistakes, and that doesn't make them fake news. But the question that I have...
But when journalists make honest mistakes, they should own up to them. Sometimes, and a lot of times you don't. But there's a difference. There's a very big... I'm sorry. I'm not finished. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people, something that happens regularly. You can't say, I'm not done. You cannot say...
that was completely fake, Sarah.
You cannot say that it's an honest mistake when you're purposely putting out information that you know to be false, or when you're taking information that hasn't been validated, that hasn't been offered any credibility, and that has been continually denied by a number of people, including people with direct knowledge of an instance. This is something that I'm speaking about the number of reports that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. I'm simply stating that there should be a certain level of responsibility in that process.
This was not,
Brian, I called on Jim.
This is not the line of questioning that I was going down, but can you cite a specific story that you say is intentionally false, that was intentionally put out there to mislead the American people?
Sure. The ABC report by Brian Ross, I think that was pretty misleading to the American people, and I think that it's very telling that that individual had to be suspended because of that reporting. I think that shows that the network took it seriously and recognized that it was a problem.
Sarah,
Jim?
if I may, though, I was going to ask a question about something else.
Well, you used it on something else. Jim?
If I may, Sarah,
Not today. We're going to keep moving, guys.
If I can ask about the president's accusations.
I'm moving to a different Jim. I'm sorry.
I know, but I didn't get a chance to ask the question that I wanted to ask, which is,
Jim,
can you just say once and for all whether the
Jim, I'm going to say once and for all that I'm moving on to Jim Stinson, and I'm not taking another question from you at this point.
I was
Sarah, a question about
investment to your attacks on
investment taxes.
If that's okay, I would like to ask the question that I had about these accusations of misconduct against the president. You said that he's denied them. Can you say whether or not they are false?
I'm not going to
That's all I'm
respond
asking.
to another question. Go ahead, Jim.
Sarah, some investors are saying the tax reform package favors mutual funds over individual investors. Other critics who want tax reform say the bill will cause some tax increases for a few middle-class tax filers. By a few, I mean maybe tens of thousands, but maybe more. Will the president sign the tax bill even if there are inadvertent tax increases and some of the criticisms are correct?
As I've said many times before, our focus and our priorities are making sure that we provide middle-class tax relief and simplifying the code, bringing businesses back here to the U.S. We're going to continue pushing for that and continue working with Congress to make sure we get the best tax package possible. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Tomorrow there is a special Senate election in Alabama. Back on September the 23rd, the president went down to Huntsville, Alabama, campaigned alongside of Luther Strange, and since that time, he never went down. In the course of the campaign alongside the Republican nominee, Roy Moore. Was the president embarrassed in terms of campaigning alongside Roy Moore? Is that the reason why we didn't see him down there in Alabama?
Look, the president has spoken directly about this race and who he supports and who he doesn't. Due to the legality of that, I'm not going to go any further and would refer you back to his past statements. April?
Sarah, what is the disconnect as it relates to this White House when it comes to then candidate Trump bringing the accusers of Bill Clinton to the debate against Hillary Clinton, and now the accusers of Roy Moore making these accusations and his accusers? What's the disconnect here?
Look, as the president said, he found the allegations troubling, and if they were true, then he should step aside, and ultimately the people of Alabama will make a decision in that race.
Well, what about his own accusers, though? He has accusers as well.
Look, the president has firsthand knowledge on what he did and didn't do. He can speak directly to those, and he has, and he's addressed them, and I don't have anything further to add. Trey?
The American public about this, because this is spinning and it's focused on him now.
And he's addressed it directly to the American people.
It's coming up new and afresh, and more people are now speaking out.
April, I'm going to keep moving.
I understand, but will the president address the nation on this? So this is a huge issue, Sarah.
I know, and there are a lot of big issues today. I'm trying to cover as many of them as possible by calling on a number of your colleagues, and I've called on Trey, and I'm going to move to him.
Will the president come out and address this, please? Sarah,
he has, April. I've already addressed this. The president has addressed it. I don't have anything else to add. Trey.
Thank you, Sarah. Today, the suspected terrorist in New York City was described as a Bangladeshi immigrant. Bangladesh is not on the president's travel ban list. Does today's attack change the way that President Trump is evaluating travel restrictions?
Look, we do know, and the Department of Homeland Security has confirmed that the suspect was admitted to the United States after presenting a passport displaying an F-43 family immigrant visa in 2011. And so we know that the president's policy calls for an end to chain migration, which is what this individual came to the United States through. And if his policy had been in place, then that attacker would not have been allowed to come in the country. That's why the president has pushed for not one part of immigration policy, but a responsible and total immigration reform. And that's why we have to look at all sectors and do what we can to make sure we're doing everything within our power to protect the American people. Olivier?
Thanks, Sarah. At the top of your remarks about ISIS, about the attack today in New York City, you talked about the need to destroy the ideology animating would-be attackers and actual attackers. What policy changes are required to do that? How do you defeat an ideology that's been attempted since 9/11 with really no great success? What are you doing differently? What can you do differently in order to do that?
I think one of the best ways that we have moved forward is in a process where we're allowing the members of the Department of Defense to aggressively move forward in defeating ISIS, and in hopes annihilating a lot of that evil ideology through part of that process. We're going to continue pushing and continue looking for the best ways possible to make sure that we protect Americans. Jessica.
Quick ones on Korea. Do you have an update on sanctions? Last week you said it would be coming in a number of days. And secondly, Victor Cha was just nominated to be the Republic of Korea ambassador. Do you have any comment?
On the first part, we're working through a legal process, and again, hope to have details further on that. It's a little bit more complicated. Once we get through that, we'll be able to walk through a little bit more detailed on the reason for some of the delay. And on the other, I don't have any personnel announcements or comments on that at this time. Go ahead.
Sarah, I'm interested in the comment you made about the suspect in New York.
Does the White House has any proof that this suspect was radicalized outside of the United States? He's been a lawful permanent resident living here for some time.
I can't get into any further details on that front at this point, but as we have them available, I'll be happy to let you know. Jennifer?
Why would his chain migration be an issue unless you were saying that
there are certain parts that I'm allowed to discuss at this point in the process. That's one of them. Anything further I can't get into at this point, but as soon as I can, we'll be happy to let you know. Jennifer?
Directive on space the president's going to announce this afternoon. Will he call for an increase in spending for NASA, or will there be commercial partnerships, or will he reduce NASA funding in other areas such as for earth science, which includes the study of climate change?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president's announcement that's coming later today, but we'll have further details once that process is completed. Cecilia?
Two questions. Who are the eyewitnesses who dispute these allegations against the president? And can you stand here right now and say without a doubt, 100% certainty that the more than dozen women who have come forward to accuse this president of misconduct are lying? Do you wrestle with this personally at all?
I'm here to speak on behalf of the president, and I can say that the president has directly responded and said that these allegations are false, and that's what I'm doing and relaying that information to you. In terms of the specific eyewitness accounts, there have been multiple reports, and be happy to provide them to you after the briefing is completed. Brian?
So let me just follow up on that question a little bit. As a woman standing out there talking to us, I know your job is to relate what the president says. Have you ever been sexually harassed, and do you understand, and I'm not saying by the president, I'm saying ever, and secondly, do you have an empathy for those who come forward? Because it's very difficult for women to come forward.
Absolutely would say that I have an empathy for any individual who has been sexually harassed, and that certainly would be the policy of the White House. I'm not here to speak about my personal experience on that front, but I'm here to relay information on behalf of the president, and that's what I'm focused on doing here today. Zeke.
Thanks, Sarah. Following up on the president's announcement last week on Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, we saw days of protests, sometimes violent protests in the Middle East, changes to the vice president's schedule as he goes to the region. Does the White House acknowledge, the president acknowledge that that decision increased tensions in an already volatile region?
Look, we're continuing to urge calm, and we're open and willing and want to continue meeting and discussing a peace deal. Look, violence is always going to be the responsibility of those who carry it out, not the president or anyone else. And again, we urge individuals and groups to remain calm, and we want to continue working with our partners, allies, and others in the region to continue moving forward on the peace conversations.
More than violence, it's about meetings being canceled. It's about diplomatic outcry from everyone, from the governments of the United Kingdom, the Pope, and the like. So why is it beneficial to the U.S. interest, as the president declared, if all of those groups, all those countries and allies are condemning that announcement?
Look, the president is taking a bold and courageous action on a law that Congress passed and had failed to implement for the last couple of decades. The president simply moving forward and taking that action on legislation that Congress has supported time and time again.
Following up on that, President Abbas, as you know, has said he will not meet with the Vice President next week. Does the President have a reaction to that? And doesn't this mean that the U.S. has effectively taken itself out of the peace process when one side won't even show up to meet with the United States?
We certainly hope not. We find it unfortunate that they're walking away from the opportunity to discuss the future of the region, but the administration remains undeterred in its efforts to help achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and our peace team remains hard at work putting together a plan, and we're going to continue pushing forward. I'm going to take one last question. Philip.
So the last suspects of terrorism were not trained in Syria or Iraq, and Thursday the Russians stopped their operations. They said that they'd gotten rid of ISIS in Syria. Saturday the Iraqi Prime Minister said his fight against ISIS is won. Why would the U.S. still need to fight on the ground over there?
Look, as long as there's any member of ISIS left, we want to continue pushing forward and making sure not only that they're eradicated, but that they don't quickly turn around and come back. And we'll continue to push forward in making sure we do what we can to defeat ISIS on all fronts, and certainly that we do what we can to protect American lives. Thanks so much, guys.
Has the president ever misrepresented the facts?
The White House briefing just wrapping up, and it was a little hot in there. Some very contentious exchanges between Sarah Sanders and the press corps over a variety of topics, including today's terror bombing in New York City, chain migration, and a news conference this morning with some women who have accused the president of sexual harassment. We've got Catherine Herridge standing by for more on the terror attack. But I'll start with Mo Alithi, former senior spokesman for Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign and a Fox News contributor, and Kevin Sheridan, a Republican strategist and former spokesman for Governor Romney, House Speaker Ryan, and the RNC. I got to tell you, that was one of the most heated press briefings I have seen in a long time. Sarah Sanders starts off by trying to talk about the terror issue and chain migration, but immediately the reporters, they wanted to talk about these accusers of President Trump, as well as problems of incorrect reporting in the past week. Take a look at this, and I'll get your reaction.
Just say, Sarah, that journalists make honest mistakes, and that doesn't make them fake news. But the question that
But when journalists make honest mistakes, they should own up to them. Sometimes, and a lot of times you don't. But there's a difference. There's a very big, I'm sorry, I'm not finished. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people, something that happens regularly. You can't say, I'm not done. You cannot say,
that was completely fake, Sarah.
you cannot say that it's an honest mistake when you're purposely putting out information that you know to be false.
Well, she certainly holds the floor and stands her ground. Mo Alithi, I'll go to you first for a reaction.
Man, look, I think when journalists make a mistake, it is fine to call them out on it. But where we're seeing a huge difference here is that when journalists make these honest mistakes, they own up to them. And to hear this White House out there talking about how it's not an honest mistake if you purposely put something out repeatedly that you know to be false, to hear that from this White House that represents a president that does this regularly, who lied repeatedly about his predecessor's birthplace, who lies repeatedly about crowd sizes or about whether or not there was fraudulent voting in the last election, it just rings a little hollow.
I think that
and they have yet to own up to any of that.
Well, and I think, Kevin, one of the things is that in particular over the weekend, there was the Dave Weigel for the Washington Post, his tweet about the crowd size photograph, which he had on his personal account. He quickly deleted, but the president decided to, really run roughshod over him, versus something that Sarah Sanders said, which was the ABC News report last week that Brian Ross got wrong and over which he got suspended. Your thoughts?
Yeah, order of magnitude different. The crowd size is obviously not nearly as important as getting the dateline wrong on two different stories. CNN and ABC both got wrong and actually sent the markets tumbling briefly, and you changed the entire narrative around whether or not the president could actually be in risk of impeachment and did something really wrong. And so, look, the president and Sarah Sanders are right. Overreach every time by the media is what's killing their credibility, and it's helping President Trump, like it or not. Every time the media gets out in front of this story and tries to sensationalize it, get clicks, get viewership, and they don't do their fact checking, they just hurt their own credibility.
I agree with that, but actually, Mo, the numbers don't necessarily bear that out. Maybe unbelievably so, but credibility in journalism has actually been on the upswing for American voters over the past little bit. And in fact, most organizations, including this one, but all across the board, because people are so into finding out more about the news and they want it live and they want it now, ratings are up, subscriptions are up, and people are paying a lot more attention. Can I play one other soundbite for you? Yeah. This is something in particular that I, as a former White House press secretary, think about a lot. You're always asked what you personally feel, and as she said, that's not her job. Listen.
Would say that I have an empathy for any individual who has been sexually harassed, and that certainly would be the policy of the White House. I'm not here to speak about my personal experience on that front, but I'm here to relay information on behalf of the president, and that's what I'm focused on.